Welcome back. Well, let's talk about our question of the day for today. And of course, I suppose it really is quite a matter of fact as to ask the question on this day: what does reconciliation mean to you? What does the day mean to you? You can SMS MLive and your comment to 33726, and each SMS will cost you R1.50. It'll scroll at the bottom of the screen for all to read. You can also send us a tweet on our Twitter account, which is @MorningLive SABC. It's quite remarkable when you still see the amount of, I suppose, reconciliation that still needs to be done here in South Africa, and not many people. And you can see there that what we spoke about earlier, that 2 in 3 South Africans do not trust one another of a different race. So, you know, it's still a long way to go. And no matter how much you look back in the past, and in fact, it was a day like this that I actually thought of that quote by Robert Sobukwe, and that was when he said, there is only one race, the human race. And I'm not sure if it actually means that here in South Africa when Robert Sobukwe said that all those years ago. I put a tweet out, and the amazing thing is the strange remarks that you get after that, where people just do not feel that way. So you write to us, let us know, what does reconciliation mean to you? Well, as we keep saying, today marks National Reconciliation Day, and according to a report by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, the majority of South Africans feel that race relations in the country have either deteriorated or they've just stayed the same. However, in the Institute's South African Reconciliation Barometer, it's indicated that 70% of people still regard the idea of one united South Africa as a desirable pursuit. To speak to us more about this from our Cape Town studio, we're joined by the Head of Policy and Analysis at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, Hofmeyr. Jan, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us here on the program.
Good morning, Leanne.
You know, Jan, I'm not sure if you were listening to me as I was just coming to the interview and just talking about the fact that South Africans are still exceptionally cynical about reconciliation and about that ideal that perhaps many, many years ago Robert Sobukwe had, saying there is only one race, and that's the human race. I'm not sure that still stands in this day and age. I mean, what are your views, especially after your report?
Well, I think, you know, you raised the question, what is reconciliation? And it's indeed a very difficult concept to grasp. And in our survey, we also ask South Africans what do they associate with the concept of reconciliation. And for us, the majority of responses centered around issues of forgiveness, but also of restitution. And so when we asked South Africans whether they felt that we're making progress or not, about 60% of our respondents said, well, we're making some progress, but also about 65% noted that reconciliation in South Africa would be impossible if we do not address the question of material inequality in South Africa. So the findings around race, I think, are concerning, but I think even more important is also the question of material restitution, and to ensure that people also experience a sense of material dignity, that their lives have changed for the better as far as their own living conditions are concerned.
Well, I mean, let's now turn our attention to the actual report, and it's indicated that 61% of South Africans say there has not been any change in race relations since 1994. You know, it's hard to understand that, but when you look at some people's lives, that's exactly how it is. What do you think's contributed to this?
Well, one of the things that we have looked at is the patterns of interaction amongst South Africans. Where do they socialize? How frequently do they socialize? And what is the quality of that interaction that takes place? And what we see is that there is very little social interaction among South Africans, you know, on an informal basis. Where we see that interaction does take place, it's normally within the workplace or in spaces of commerce where people sort of typically have to engage with each other. These are spaces that are typically also more legislated through legislation that encourages integration within the workplace. But we do not see that same levels of interaction, social engagement, when we leave these sort of legislated spheres and we move to private homes, to places of religious worship, or within sort of community sort of engagements.
In the work context, I mean, that's what you mention, is that's where we do see the bit of integration that is here in the country. That's where most people get to interact with one another and with different races. But that is enforced, and it's not social. And that's the reality. It's not that the free social side of things that we would love to see. What needs to be done? What more needs to be done?
Indeed. I mean, I think what one does see is that people get socialized within their very sort of homogenous sort of neighborhoods, which are sort of largely still race specific in South Africa, and then they engage with each other in the workplace or in these sort of commercial spaces. And very often it also creates friction, because we always sort of test our experiences sort of within our place where we live with our family and friends and so on. And I'm afraid there are no sort of simple solutions to this. I think much can be done sort of on the level of education amongst young children, but there are also very sort of structural factors that reinforce these patterns of interaction. And I mean, these include infrastructure that was created still under apartheid, but we still use, if we just think where people live in relation to their workplace. The fact that few people use the same modes of transport, and also then, of course, economic inequality. Yeah. We do say where people do interact, it's largely within the upper LSM categories. People in the lower LSM categories are not as mobile, and therefore do not always have the opportunity to engage.
You know, let's just turn our attention to what we saw happening this year with the students, and I think it brings us to that point of the born frees. Now, you know, they are perceived to be racially cursed. Is this the case, or is it just a presumption? I mean, what we saw playing out with the Fees Must Fall march, I mean, we did see integration, but then again, is that just, I don't know, is it just something that we perceived, or is it reality?
Well, I think we saw sort of multiracial protests, but I think at the heart of it is also the experiences of many students, where they sort of basically feel that that the spaces within which they engage are largely still spaces that are dominated by a specific kind of culture. And I think much of it also had to do with not feeling at home within these particular spaces. If one looks at the reported experience of interaction among South Africans and also racism specifically, what is interesting to us is that the experience of racism cuts across generational groups. So I think what we've seen with Fees Must Fall was a unique way of engagement of a specific generation of South Africans. But as far as the experience of racism is concerned, we have not seen sort of a particular pattern amongst generations.
Just finally, I mean, are we unique? When you look around the world, I know that we've come from a very different past to many other countries, but in terms of integration, is our situation unique to the rest of the world?
Look, it's very difficult to combine or to compare ourselves to other countries. And I think in that way, one has to say that we have got a very unique history of colonialism, of apartheid, and also the way in which it's being reinforced today still. So this is a very sort of unique kind of society that we have. And it also then requires unique situations. I do not think one should look at other countries and say, well, we must be like that or try to implement this. We as South Africans have to find our own homegrown solutions.
I think I may have a minute just to ask you one more question before we wrap up the interview. You know, we look at the maid and the madam relations between the black worker and white employer. Is there still this distrust? Because we're reporting that there is a huge distrust amongst races here in South Africa, and especially amongst black people, that white people do not see them as equals in the workplace or in a social context.
Yes, I mean, what our findings showed us is that those levels of distrust are still very high. And this is the case for the country as a whole, but we also see it within each of the different or respective racial categories. That each of them have reported very high levels of distrust. So yes, I mean we do have these sort of engagements, but very often they are being sort of conducted on a very uneven basis, and therefore people do not always feel free to express what they actually feel, and therefore when one does see this again reflected within the home or within the area where a person is socialized, but we very, very often hold back in terms of what our daily experiences are as being South African, being within a particular context.
All right. Let's leave it there for this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. The Head of Policy and Analysis at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, Hofmeyr, in our Cape Town Sea Point studios. Let's take